It's Wednesday and it's Uncovered. I'm Anthony Davis, he's Ron Filipkowski, and this is the show where we uncover far-right propaganda in America. And boy, is there a lot to do. Thank you to you if you're just joining us. We are live here on the MeidasTouch network, and there'll be an audio version of this show available later, so you can download it if you want to listen to it again or in the privacy of a darkened room. Ron, we have a lot to get through today, including multiple Donald Trump stories, including a gag order and his lawyer getting humiliated, his cognitive decline. We've got Ron DeSantis, who reckons that Democrats don't want anyone to be Christian, and all sorts of things, including Lauren Boebert explaining what really went on during the Beetlejuice show. Not on the stage, but, you know, in her immediate vicinity. So all that to look forward to. But Ron, tell us about this breaking news that Cassidy Hutchinson, who's the former Trump aide turned crucial January 6 witness, says in a new book that she was groped by Rudy Giuliani, who was like a wolf closing in on its prey on the day of the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol. What's happening here?
I think everybody remembers Cassidy Hutchinson's compelling testimony, which, by the way, only came about because she fired her Trump lawyer who was trying to get her to lie.
Right.
And she went forward with her testimony, and it was very compelling. But she did not mention this. And she has a book coming out next week. And this is apparently in the book, something she saved for the book, which I know people are going to have an issue with that. Republicans are already starting to say, well, why didn't she mention this sooner?
Well, this happens all the time in this country, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's like people will hold on to the most emotionally compromising information just because there's a book coming out. And that's not something I've ever understood. So we can't blame Cassidy Hutchinson. I'm sure it's on the advice of her publisher, but this happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yes. And it could also be the case that she just didn't want to talk about this publicly, right. And she was embarrassed or humiliated or whatever the case may be. We know in situations like this, the victims do not always come forward until much later after they've had a chance to process it and deal with it and get counseling. So that may also be the case. It might not just be the book. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I mean, look, this is Rudy has a long history here. He's being sued right now by his personal assistant who has tapes of him, sexually harassing and assaulting her. There have been other women who have made similar kind of complaints. Of course, he was famously in the movie. What was the movie? The Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yes.
Boebert, the Boebert movie. So, I mean, Rudy has a history of being a pervert. And but this goes beyond that, because this most likely happened in the White House or thereabouts, and this happened on January 6th, and we already heard reports that Rudy was highly intoxicated from other people, and we know that when Rudy gets drunk, this is what Rudy does.
Yeah,
and it's but it also shows this is Donald Trump's personal lawyer who's in the White House. He brings this person in and has them around these young women working in there. And it's just part of the whole culture of MAGA and Trump.
I mean, I was thinking, what was I listening to? I was listening to Lauren Boebert talking about men. And I know we're going to talk about her later, but this is just as an aside, is it that Republican men, and this sounds like I'm tarring all Republican men with one brush, and I really am not, but it seemed to me that the experience of a lot of females who come into contact with this, I don't know whether it's just the kind of US machismo, over testosterone thing where, that seems to be a lot less equality in this country than many other countries when it comes to the kind of male-female roles, gender roles. And I think it was Lauren Boebert just describing the experience of being around guys and what guys are going to say and what to expect from guys, this kind of bro culture, which sure, it exists in other countries, but in different ways. And I really do feel that, I speak as a European man, obviously, so it's a slightly different perspective on things, but there really is this kind of disgusting view of women on behalf of some American men, where women can be just treated like, fodder. And it's so grim that in this day and age, and if we're talking about Rudy Giuliani in 2000 and that was 2021, wasn't it? I mean, it's not long ago to go, oh, it was the 70s, it was the 80s, the culture was different back then. We're talking about the modern day. And if you haven't worked out by now that as a man in the modern day, that you have to control yourself, control your urges, be respectful, you can't even hug people without being given access. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Fist bumps is where it's at.
Look, I've criticized Joe Biden for that. I mean, Joe Biden is part of that era, of the baby boomer generation where he's very touchy-feely, hug, kiss, and it bothers people now when they see it, and so it's the people that are from a different era, I think don't really get it that times have changed, but it's also why you mentioned the Republican men. It's part of this new alpha male, culture Tucker Carlson and others have been promoting, and it gets promoted on right-wing social media, that we need to go back to the traditional 1950s way of living. And, they look at a lot of liberal or Democratic men who treat women with respect and equality, and they call them beta, that they're weak, that is somehow weakness if you're not a tough alpha male dominating your female partner. And so there is toxic masculinity involved here, and it is a cultural thing. And we see this played out time and time again. The Ken Paxton, the Kristi Noem stuff with Corey Lewandowski. We could go on, and of course with Donald Trump as well.
Because ultimately it is dangerous, it is so dangerous. And of course, a big story is broken about Russell Brand, who people may or may not know, but he has very outwardly over decades been a very kind of sexualized character and always boasted about his kind of conquests. And I was really trying to analyze that and think about because of his charisma, it overpowers your thinking about the victims. It's like you expect sex offenders or sex abusers or to be, like in big coats hiding in the shadows. But when they're not, when people are outwardly confident, I mean, Donald Trump is one of these, as E. Jean Carroll will testify. When you are a public figure and you are outwardly charismatic, it means that people often forget that there are victims. And in order for people to live these kind of hedonistic lifestyles, there will always be a victim.
Yeah, you don't even have to believe E. Jean Carroll. You could believe Donald Trump himself in the Access Hollywood tape.
Right.
I mean, he bragged about this, going up to women and doing this to them.
Yeah.
So, it's part of the culture. And I think Democrats are very well served to not be a part of that mentality, and it's a reason why women tend to vote Democrat as well.
Isn't it interesting though how politics, which you should never really equate to sexuality or kind of gender roles, that it is in America. That politics is attached to these kind of gender stereotypes, which is, I find, very surprising. And in fact, to quote Lauren Boebert, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but she said, "I'll never date a Democrat again."
Right, there you go.
Right? It's so interesting to me. Anyway, we'll save that conversation for another time because we've got a lot to get through today. So we'll keep our eyes on that Rudy Giuliani story, as if he hasn't got enough trouble on his plate already. Let's talk about Donald Trump doing this NBC interview. I put out a little video on MeidasTouch kind of analyzing some of what he had to say, where he basically admitted the crime yet again of stealing these documents and claiming that he's covered by the Presidential Records Act. Seems to forget that he's not the president. Anyway, that aside, so sure Jack Smith is thrilled about that. In that same interview, he talked about abortion. Just tell us about this, before we play the clip, just tell us about what happened.
Well, this is Donald Trump thinks he's got the solution for Republicans on abortion, And if you notice, what he talks about is not changing their position or their policy. He says, we have to change the way we talk about it. We message it. So what he's saying is, you can still have your position, you can still believe what you want, but this is what you need to say to basically fool the voters. And of course, yes, look, Donald Trump doesn't care about outlawing abortion. He doesn't care one way or the other about this issue personally. He could care less. Okay. So the only thing Donald Trump cares about is Donald Trump. And this doesn't affect him that much anymore, this issue. It maybe did at one time when he was probably paying for them, but it doesn't really affect him much anymore. So he doesn't really care about the issue. What he cares about is winning this election. So obviously he's for the exceptions, you know, the rape, incest, that the exceptions he's for, of course, life of mother. And that's caused him some people on the right to really get upset, including a lot of the evangelicals and pro-lifers that he endorsed. And Trump truly believed that, you know, since he got Roe overturned and he got those 3 justices in, that the evangelicals would not abandon him if he changed position and did a 180 here to win this election. And he's finding out that, no, pro-lifers, they really do care about this issue passionately. For many of them, it's their number one most important issue.
Like the only thing they care about. But what's so interesting is he's having to go back and use this old trope that Democrats are for abortion up to full term of pregnancy and even after birth, right? How he expects a child to be executed after it's been birthed, I have no idea. But, you know, it doesn't even make sense. And yet he keeps pushing this narrative. And I have to say the interviewer has come up for a lot of flack over this because she did not push back enough. She allowed him to lie and push propaganda. And really, NBC should never have had Donald Trump on for an interview, you know, this kind of full-length interview like this. Let me show the clip and then we'll talk a bit more about it.
Okay.
With Hillary Clinton, when we had the debate, I made a statement, rip the baby out of the womb in the 9th month. You're allowed to do that, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Again, no one is arguing for that. That's not a part of anyone's platform, Mr. President.
The Democrats are able to kill the baby after birth.
Let me talk to you.
Nobody wants that.
Democrats don't want that
so
either.
we're going to come together.
I want to know what you want. I want to know what you're going to do.
I mean, it's just painful, but even the language to say rip the baby out of the womb, I mean, who says that? Like, who would ever think to put those words in a sentence?
What he's saying here, and what he said repeatedly to Republicans, is every time you're asked about abortion, you should talk about the 3 exceptions, and then you should talk about Democrats' position and say that this is their position. In other words, what he's saying is, do not talk about, if you're for a heartbeat or 6-week ban or 15 ban, he's telling him, don't talk about it. And as you can see, he won't talk about those things. He refuses to say what his clear position on abortion is. He will only say, I'm for the 3 exceptions, and Democrats want to kill babies at 9 months. The reality is, of course, those are only life of mother situations where either the baby is going to die or the mother is going to die. It is much less than 1% of all abortions. It's a microscopic number. So when he says, here's the contradiction in his position. When he says he's for the 3 exceptions, well, those abortions he's talking about are one of the exceptions. Life of mother. That's when these abortions are happening. So when he says, I'm for a life of mother exception, and we shouldn't have abortions late term, that's what life of mother exceptions are.
He's just a disgusting human being. He really is. And I really feel that on this topic, it exposes quite how little care he has for other humans, especially women. He just has no interest or respect for women. And it just goes back to what we were saying earlier about this kind of political divide and how Republicans are increasingly seeing women as second-class citizens. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is trying to bring about parity, you know, both at home and in the boardroom. So we've got a few kind of Donald Trump stories to talk about. The other video you posted on Twitter or X or Elon or whatever it's called this week was this one about where we kind of visibly see his cognitive decline and something they're always criticizing Joe Biden, who always corrects himself. You know, if Joe Biden has stutters or gets confused with something, he always corrects himself and gets back on track. In this clip, Donald Trump doesn't correct his mistakes. He tries to then work them like a spaghetti junction into the narrative. It's so weird. Let's watch it and then we'll give it some analysis.
The radical left thugs who have weaponized law enforcement to arrest their leading political opponent, and leading by a lot, including Obama. I'll tell you what, you take a look at Obama and take a look at some of the things that he's done. This is the same thing. The country is very divided. And we did with Obama. We won an election that everyone said couldn't be won.
Including Obama, you see and then he couldn't remember Joe Biden's name, so he said Obama a second time. I mean, who is this guy?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, what Joe would do in that situation. Sorry, I lost my voice there. Is say, oh, excuse me, I meant Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
You know, that's what Joe would do.
Yeah.
But yes, this is part of Donald Trump can never admit a mistake,
right,
and can never say that he messed something up. So he just acts like, oh no, I meant to say Obama.
Yeah.
You know, and he starts weaving and he makes it worse. And then, you know, what's not in that clip is he talked about, you know, how Joe was going to start World War II.
That's right.
You know, of course, that was also part of it. So yeah, I mean, for every you know, Joe Biden gaffe clip, we can trot out 3 or 4 Trump gaffe clips if we want.
It's so interesting. Can you imagine Donald Trump going, oh, excuse me, I mean...
Never. He's never done that.
Never, ever would say, oh, I'm sorry, or, oh, excuse me. Just
Never.
Normal, you know, normal linguistics, normal kind of American English language.
Because
Normal.
to him, that's a sign of weakness if you admit that you made a mistake.
A sign of weakness to me is not knowing a thing about abortions or about the needs of women's health care. That's a sign of weakness, you know, or trying to overturn the election because he didn't like the result. That's a sign of weakness. It's so, I am becoming, and you may have noticed because I'm putting out increasingly explicit videos where I'm just like, I am done with this guy. I'm just ready for him to exit stage left and us never hear from him ever again. And unfortunately, that is not going to happen. You know, this has been years now, from pre-2016 that we've been listening to this garbage and this propaganda and this rhetoric. I mean, you know, 7, 8 years of this like constant Trumpism. It's really not good for the psyche. As you can see, Ron, I'm falling apart here.
It's worse now than it was in 20 or 2016. It's worse.
And for those of us that analyze it and report on it, you know, as our jobs, it's not great for our mental health. I mean, you know, I dream of this guy. You know, I literally am dreaming of it. It's an illness, you know, to have to kind of. Can you imagine like actually being a Trump supporter and like living, breathing, dreaming and sleeping Donald Trump? Maybe that's worse.
Yeah, I mean, I've developed such a thick skin over because I've listened to so much Trump, you know, all of his speeches, podcast interviews and stuff, that it you know, I used to do that. Blood pressure would go up, throw things at the TV, scream and yell. Yeah. It doesn't really affect me anymore just because I've become, and that's probably, you know, what he wants is for people to become desensitized to the lies.
Right. But it's important. I mean, I you know, I'm not emotionally invested. I kind of save my emotions for my family, but I feel like there is a knock-on effect because it is just relentless. And he I mean, that interview, that full-length NBC interview is worth watching. And I actually have recorded a video, which we haven't put out yet, where I take in every single question that is asked and I explain how I would rephrase the question.
Good. Because
I recognize that what they used was a very traditional form of broadcasting interview technique, which does not work with a guy like Trump. And when he's lying and saying this crap, you can't go, well, sorry, excuse me, sir, Mr. President, we need to get back on track. You can't do that. You have to use short words and go, no, or that's a lie. That's a lie. That's untrue. You can't get into a kind of interplay with him because he is a steamroller. And, he used that interview as like a TV version of a rally. And he won. That was a puff piece, effectively.
Yeah, you don't call him Mr. President over and over again because he forfeited that right when he said Biden is not legitimate and he's the legal winner of the election. I believe that you don't now treat him like a former president and give him that respect because he forfeited that when he tried to overturn the election and by still claiming he's the legitimate winner. If he conceded that he lost, I would say, fine, call him Mr. President, but he won't do it. So he forfeits that. So yeah, that's just one thing. But the other thing is, the fact that he even agreed to that, look at who he agreed to. He agreed to do an interview with her. I'm talking about mainstream. And he agreed to do an interview with Caitlin Collins.
Yeah.
Well, somebody who's two people who are brand new at their new jobs, just got their positions, women that he felt he could steamroll and intimidate.
Dominate, yeah. Again, goes back to this conversation we've just been having. And maybe I was thinking, in her defense, I was thinking that maybe he put "Call Me Mr. President" a prerequisite. Like in his rider, if I'm going to do this interview, you're going to call me Mr. President. And it's highly likely that that was the case. But the thing is, once she got into it with him, she didn't need to keep saying it because he was then caught into the ego. So he didn't, she didn't need to keep it up. She could have just done it once or twice at the beginning and then not referred to him as anything. It's not necessary to keep saying somebody's name. Let's talk about Alina Habba now. She's one of Trump's many very attractive lawyers. I don't know where he finds these people. They're gorgeous, some of these people. Absolutely never seen people like this before. But she's a rookie lawyer, and she's got herself into a situation. Just explain what this is, and I'll put this image up. What is this story?
Well, this story is about his new rookie lawyer. So Alina Habba had this case, and she was this is the case of the defamation lawsuit that Trump filed against Hillary because of Russiagate. He sued Hillary Clinton for defamation. That was thrown out, and people famously remember Alina Habba was sanctioned along with Donald Trump by the federal judge, saying that it was a frivolous lawsuit. So what does Trump do? He gets this kid right here, fresh out of law school. He graduated law school in 2021, sworn into the Florida bar in May of 2022. So he's been a lawyer for 1 year. So he gets this kid to slap his name and refile the same lawsuit, citing newly discovered evidence. What was the newly discovered evidence? The release of the Durham report. And, the judge just completely destroyed this brief. He didn't personally go after this kid because I think the judge gave the kid a break, actually. Didn't sanction him and just ripped him to shreds. But, you think about it, this kid this is his first big case.
Can you
started
imagine
his legal career?
The responsibility. I should say, for the purposes of equality, that he is very handsome as well. Just want to make sure that all lawyers get treated with the same brush, as are you. What's so interesting, just going back to the interview, was that the things like the Durham report that Trump uses as reference to make his point are all garbage, right? He talked about the Twitter files in the NBC interview. He talked about 2000 Mules, that ridiculous documentary that was made by, was it Kash Patel that made that documentary?
No, it wasn't Patel. Dinesh D'Souza.
Dinesh D'Souza, excuse me. And, he's referring to like propaganda videos and the stuffing of the ballots in the bag, which he saw on video, right? Which, has now been totally debunked. And yet his argument was, but it's on video. We saw it. Now, it's been explained a gazillion times what that was. And yet because he's so dumb, if he sees it on the video, like when he sees something on the news and then he becomes an expert on it because he saw it for 4 seconds, he rewrites the history like he did with the Panama Canal recently. It becomes fact to him. I mean, he really is, so he's like the kind of TV president, isn't he? He has never read anything, but if he sees a Scooby-Doo movie and there's a ghost gets chased, he'll be he's suddenly an expert on the ghosts in history because he saw an episode of a cartoon. I mean, that's how dumb this guy is, and that's what we've been dealing with for the last 7 years.
Yeah, well, the way most humans function is, you might read or see something, but then you can have your mind changed. You can become convinced based on reading different reports, facts, and then what most of us do, and we go, oh, I was wrong about that, or yeah, I had that wrong. I didn't have all the facts. Yeah, now I've become convinced that that's not true. That Donald Trump doesn't have that in his brain at all, that switch. So once Donald Trump becomes convinced that something is true, you could hit him over the head with a 2x4. He will never, ever admit that he was wrong. Even
after legal cases, she said to him, you've lost over 60 cases because he has no respect for the law.
And that's where these interviewers make the mistake, is when they start citing, well, you lost court case. That means nothing to Donald Trump. You can't use that line of attack, at all. And that's why I talked about the Jonathan Swan interview and the Brett Baer interviews. They didn't do that. No. They did what you said. They pinned him down. They used short words. They wouldn't let him wiggle off the hook, and they got him many times.
Because you have to use entrapment tactics when you're working, with a malignant narcissist. You have to give them a shit sandwich, effectively, and sell them a situation for them to confess in. Saying that, he did confess to a couple of things.
Yes. So, but instead of her saying well, nobody thinks that it's useless. That's a useless thing to say.
Yes.
What you say to Donald Trump is, who said that?
Yeah.
Give me a name.
Yeah.
When did they say it?
Yeah.
How many of those abortions happened last year?
Yeah.
You got to pin him. You can't just say, oh, nobody thinks that, because then he'll go, oh, yes, they do.
Now, meanwhile, there's been talk of a gag order for the last few weeks regarding Jack Smith and, these cases because Donald Trump can't keep his mouth shut. And it was just after the gag order was first kind of mooted or recently mooted and discussed, and that Jack Smith kind of put this motion forward to Tanya Chutkan, did Donald Trump post the following. He wrote, Biden prosecutor, deranged Jack Smith, has asked the court to limit 45th president and leading Republican nominee by more than 50 points and beating Dems Donald J. Trump's public statements. So I'm campaigning for president against an incompetent person who has weaponized the DOJ and FBI to go after his political opponent, and I am not allowed to comment. They leak and sue, and they won't allow me to speak. How else would I explain that Jack Smith is deranged or Crooked Joe is incompetent? I mean, the irony that Smith, goes to seek a gag order, and Donald Trump's response is to abuse him on social media.
Yeah, literally hours later. I mean, what I tweeted was his lawyers were probably in their office huddled, typing their response to Jack Smith's motion, and then some young staffer in their firm says, hold on, look at what Donald Trump just posted, and they all just went, oh shit, we got to change this. So this is going to be really interesting, and Judge Chutkan has not issued her order yet. I assume she will, and I assume this will be a limited gag order, and the devil's going to be in the details here. What I really want to see the wording of it, how it's going to be enforced, what the enforcement mechanism is, because the question is, if you violate the gag order, is she going to consider that a violation of his pretrial release where he could have that revoked and be put in jail? Or is she going to handle it with a fine? What sanction is going to be put in there? And then how narrow is it going to be tailored? It's most likely going to say what Jack Smith asked for is You can't disparage the prosecutors, the witnesses, the jury pool, which means DC,
Yeah.
or him, or, you know, his staff. And, you know, the other question is, once that gets issued, what is going to be Trump's reaction? What is going to be MAGA reaction? I think it's going to be a very big deal when that order comes out.
There was an article in the LA Times today. I don't know if you saw it, but it was basically saying that it would be more dangerous for these people who are trying to push the 14th Amendment to get Trump off the ballot because he's been involved in insurrection. They were saying, you know, you are much better off allowing democracy to play out, have him on the ballot and have him lose to get through this period in political history, rather than remove him from the ballot under those terms. And then forever after, he's going to play the victim and say, I was silenced, and compare it to Russia and all this type of stuff. What's your view on that? Because I kind of agree.
I think his argument becomes a lot more persuasive to people if that happens. Yeah. I understand the legal argument and the case for doing it, but at the same time, like, I think if you do it without a criminal conviction, I think if you do it after he's convicted, let's say he goes to trial in March in DC, he loses in April, then it's done. I think that you could make a much more of a plausible argument. But if you have, you know, some third party group or PAC or something that finances an effort to do that, and it happens, then I think that's just, it's bad. I agree with you. I think it's just going to cause way too many problems. I'm confident in our democracy. I'm also confident in our legal system, and I just want it to work. I don't want it to be done that way. Of course, the one exception I would say is, like, if a Republican does it. I know, like, the Republican Secretary of State in New Hampshire talked about it. Well, that might be a little bit of a different situation, because you could just say, hey, this is a Republican doing it, not us.
I mean, the other issue is that if Trump was to be on the ballot and was to lose by a significant margin, or any margin, he's going to claim it was fraud. He is going to do it again. And the whole process of, you know, it's elections rigged and all this stuff, we're just going to go through that whole process yet again. And so that's going to happen whether he's on the ballot or not on the ballot, right? The argument is effectively the same, that they're trying to silence me.
Yeah, there's no scenario by which Trump would ever admit that he lost any election.
Yeah.
That will never, ever happen. Yeah.
We really do need to kind of, this is why, you know, it makes no sense to me that mental health and, you know, the narcissism aspect of this is never mentioned in the mainstream media in any depth. You know, it's like a throwaway comment, but, you know, you really, if you take an interest in the kind of mental pathology or the psychology of this, you know, you really do kind of get to know who Donald Trump is pretty easily. You know, he is textbook narcissist, and you know, so much is written about this. I'm sure people are in relationships with narcissists. They understand what you're dealing with here. And yet, weirdly, because he's a presidential candidate and former president, it's almost like, oh, well, that can't apply because, you know, if you're a president, you're superhuman. I mean, I think Obama actually was superhuman, but that's just my view.
Yeah, and they have to be treated differently and treated with kid gloves and shown respect and deference and all of that. Yeah, we have to start treating this guy like that way. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about Matt Gaetz and, well, the kind of situation that's going on with Kevin McCarthy, because, you know, he really is like losing control of Congress, and there's so much on him at the moment. Obviously, there's the kind of the debt, which is going to become an issue. I guess, when are we going to start hearing about that in full? Like next week, when that's going to, you know, government shutdowns, and then there's leverage, and then there's going to be blackmail, and then now there's this issue with. Before I play the clip, just explain what it is that Matt Gaetz is talking about here, because this is kind of specific to Byron Donalds, isn't it?
This is incredibly interesting. I mean, some of this is kind of like inside baseball stuff where, you know, people who are real political junkies would be into this, and people who are casual observers maybe not. But I think that probably most people, if they're watching the show, fall into the junkie category. So they hopefully will find this interesting, but it's painfully interesting to me. So Byron Donalds was called upon to negotiate the continuing resolution to keep the government open, a compromise, on behalf of the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus, of course, is the far right group of about 24, 25 people, who, by the way, kicked out Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's the reason why they kicked her out of the caucus. One big reason is because she supported Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. Right. So Byron Donalds is in this group. So he was tasked with negotiating a continuing resolution compromise with the Main Street Caucus. The Main Street Caucus is all the moderate business, traditional establishment, Wall Street type Republicans in Congress. So the news comes out on Sunday night around 4:00 in the afternoon Eastern time that they've reached a deal. And of course, what do we find out? Then the Freedom Caucus members, led by Gates, Corey Mills, several others, went ballistic. Ralph Norman went ballistic and said, well, wait a minute, we don't agree with this deal. So the first crazy part is what popped into my head is, wait a minute, Byron Donalds negotiated this deal. Did he check with his own people? Like, did he even make sure that they were on board with this? He's just negotiating on their behalf, and then none of them want this. So you have that dynamic. But the other dynamic is, if you remember, when they didn't want McCarthy as Speaker, they nominated Byron Donalds to challenge McCarthy for Speaker. So here you have all these Freedom Caucus members on Sunday night and all day Monday absolutely trashing Byron Donalds, who they just 6 months before, put up for Speaker against McCarthy. So it's so terribly interesting to me how this is played out. The other part of this is the news broke this week that Gates intends to run for governor of Florida in 2026. And many people have said that Byron Donalds also wants to run for governor of Florida. So you have that dynamic working here also.
It's very interesting. And Matt Gaetz, as much as I despise him with every pore of my body, he is quite a good public speaker, and he can be kind of engaging, and he has good use of the kind of political language. And I just thought I'd point that out as you watch this clip of him basically taking control of Congress. Here it is.
War 3. I oppose the CR authored by my friend and colleague from Florida, Byron Donalds. The Donalds CR continues the Ukraine policy negotiated by Speaker Pelosi and Mitch McConnell in the omnibus that conservatives were against. The Donalds CR is a permission slip for Jack Smith to continue his election interference as they are trying to gag the president, the former president of the United States, and the leading contender for the Republican nomination. And the Donalds CR abandons the principle that it is only a review of single subject spending bills that will save this country and allow us to tweeze through these programs and force these agencies to stand up and defend their budget. My friends, we are approaching the days where we're facing $2 trillion annual deficits atop a $33 trillion debt. This is unsustainable. And just to continue things with some facial 8% cut over 30 days that will lead to no programmatic reform is an insult to the principles we fought for in January. I yield back.
Let's not forget how much debt Donald Trump added to the national debt during his presidency. They always seem to leave that bit out, don't they?
Of course. Well, when you're a member of a political party, how it works is, when you're in a legislative body, is that you fight for your constituents, you fight for your individual things that you care about as hard as you can. But there comes a point in time when you have to compromise, and you have to toe the line a little bit and say, okay, I didn't get what I wanted this time, but I'm going to work the system, and I'm going to get it next time, and I'm going to work hard next time. What you don't do is blow up the whole party. And so the Democrats are incredibly unified. I mean, there are things that Democrats don't agree with the leadership on. But, when Pelosi calls the vote, they vote, and they realize, okay, maybe I didn't get everything I wanted. I'll get it next year. But the Republican Party right now has about 25 people who do not agree with that mentality. They're not team players. They're not loyal to the Republican Party. They're not loyal to each other. They each have their own agenda. And in this negotiation, some of them, what they want is they want to defund Jack Smith. They want, and they're not going to vote for this unless Jack Smith is defunded. They want to defund Ukraine. They want more money for the border wall. They each have their own little individual thing. And what they're saying is, if I don't get my one thing, I'm taking my ball and going home. And that's just not the way party politics works, but that's the way this dysfunctional Republican Party works. And they're also saying that if they don't get what they want, they're going to get rid of Kevin McCarthy as speaker. So McCarthy is in this weird position right now where he could easily make a deal with Democrats and get this done easily, and he wouldn't need all these people. But if he does that, he's toast. He'll never keep his job. But if he doesn't do that, the government shuts down and he's got to deal with all these nutcases. So I don't know how he's going to get himself out of this mess.
I would just say, and every time we come round to a government shutdown, I'm going to stick with this theory that none of it is necessary, right? It is all political theater. It's a kind of performative sequence that happens where, we have to shut down the government because we haven't agreed on the budget. It's like, there is nobody else to do this. It doesn't need even to be done. You could just keep funding the government as every other government gets funded. There's absolutely no reason to have this kind of performative sequence every now and then. Unfortunately, the people that pay the price invariably are federal workers who don't get paid whilst the government is shut down and have to kind of carry the cost of that. They get their money back, several weeks later, but often people are living paycheck to paycheck, so they can't afford to go for 2 or 3 weeks without any money. And then a shutdown happened during Trump's presidency, as we know. But none of it is necessary because, when you're talking about debt of trillions and trillions of dollars to kind of fund the next period of government, it's essential, right? You can't live without government. It's part of the fabric of the United States. It's the institution to which we all operate under. And yet there has to be this very theatrical show of left and right and push and pull. And, the people suffer as a result of it. It's just a waste of time.
Merrick Garland brought it up today in his testimony in front of the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah.
He said that, because if the government does shut down, basically what happens is every government agency under the law can only continue to keep people working who are considered essential workers. Right. So what he was saying is if this happens, that he's got to, there might be criminal investigations and prosecutions that get put on hold that don't continue forward while the government shut down. So it affects not only postal workers or whatever, it affects actual criminal justice as well.
But could it affect the Donald Trump case, the Jack Smith, Tanya Chutkan case in D.C.? Because maybe,
it's a good question.
Just a theory here, but maybe Trump knows this and is pushing for a government shutdown so as to delay or indeed stop his case from continuing.
My guess is that the people on Jack Smith's team would volunteer to work for free.
Yeah.
Is my guess.
I would work for free on that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very interesting, and I don't I don't want to encourage a government shutdown, but it's just so sad that politicians use civil servants as bait in these instances. Talking of which, let's talk about Ken Paxton now, the Texas Attorney General. This is an interesting story, isn't it? Just tell us about this before I show the video.
Yeah, there's so many layers to this because, this is the thing that has to be emphasized here is this is Republican on Republican violence. Right. Democrats have nothing to do with this. Yeah. Everyone involved in this is a Republican. The witnesses, the lawyers, the legislators, Paxton, you name it. So what this is the Attorney General of Texas is Ken Paxton is the worst attorney general in America. He's just a corrupt SOB. He does constantly illegal things, but he's also very popular with Texas Republican voters. They vote him in by big margins. He had a primary challenger in Louis Gohmert this last time, and he beat Louis by a lot. And Louis used all of this stuff in the campaign. Yeah. So what Paxton did, I'll just give you the short part of it because I watched lots of the hearings was he basically had a guy who was doing him favors, giving him money, hiring his mistress, because Paxton was having an affair with a woman in San Antonio. He wanted her closer. So this guy gave her a job, in Austin, in the Capitol, so he could be close to his mistress. By the way, Paxton's wife is a state senator in the Texas legislature who was on his jury. And this guy was under federal investigation. Nate Paul is his name. And what he wanted Paxton to do was hire an outside lawyer, a special attorney, to come in and run interference for him with the feds. And I keep losing my voice here. And that's what Paxton did. And his deputies all threatened to resign. They went to the FBI over it. They thought that what he was doing was illegal and unethical, but he did it anyway, and so that led to this impeachment.
Okay, well, he goes on Steve Bannon's podcast and kind of talks about this. Let's take a look.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's certainly critical to my state, and that's why we fought off these 12 lawsuits. We had them in Houston, we had them in San Antonio, we had them in Austin, we had them in the counties where you'd have the most liberal judges, and it was a concerted effort nationally, with lots of money going into it. And just knowing that we had 12 lawsuits that we had to win. And if we had lost one of them, like we lost Harris County, Trump won by 620,000 votes in Texas. Harris County mail-in ballots that they wanted to send out were 2.5 million. Those were all illegal, and we were able to stop every one of them. Had we not done that, we would have been in the very same situation. We would have been on election night. I was watching election night, and I knew when I saw what was happening in these other states, that would have been Texas. We would have been in the same boat. We would have been one of those battleground states that they were counting votes in Harris County for 3 days, and Donald Trump would have lost the election.
Well, that clip shows this. That's a little bit older clip, but that shows why Ken Paxton was so important for Donald Trump to keep in his job.
Right. Because
what he said there is Donald Trump would have lost Texas if he hadn't sued 16 counties in 2020 to prevent mail-in balloting. So Paxton is bragging that he got a couple of million mail-in ballots thrown out, which helped Donald Trump win the election. And that's why Donald Trump and his allies fought so hard to win this impeachment. And after the impeachment, Trump posted on Truth Social that he made calls to the jurors, to the Texas senators, and he was responsible for Paxton winning.
Do you know, I was just thinking about this argument about Donald Trump and election fraud, and the fact that if in the NBC interview, but certainly in all other analysis that's done, nobody really focuses on the fact that if Trump had claimed that everything was fraud that he said was fraud, it's still not enough to change the outcome of the election. And this is something that is really important, right? It's like, yeah, okay, fine. You think dead people voted? Fine. It's still not enough to change the outcome. There was a 7 million vote difference. You're talking about a few thousand here or there, or 6 people in that county. It's like, focusing on that and presenting that argument to Donald Trump and his surrogates, that it's not enough to change the outcome, to me is a very compelling argument. And yet it's an argument that is very rarely used.
Well, no, because they brush it off because, they have many other theories about other votes that, have been stolen from them. But no, Ken Paxton is a key part of the chess game. And the other thing that, by the way, that the MAGA Republicans have argued is that by them winning this trial, that basically ends the Bush era in Texas, that this was right. MAGA versus Bush, and that this acquittal signifies that the old era of the Bush family dominance over Texas politics is officially dead now.
It's the end of the dynasty. I'm thrilled to see the Republicans turning on each other. It's like Lord of the Flies, isn't it? They're getting to that point now where they've run out of food. Oh,
and the Speaker of the House, by the way, of the Texas House, absolutely blasted the impeachment ruling, and he's a Republican. So
while that clip was playing, I was looking up what the national debt was when Donald Trump became president. It was $19.9 trillion. When Donald Trump left office, the national debt was $27.7 trillion, which means that Donald Trump's presidency added $7.8 trillion to the national debt. I mean,
Look,
you don't want a reality TV show host being in charge of the government.
All you have to do is look at Trump's 50-plus year record in business.
Yeah.
Trump doesn't worry about debt. No. Trump will leverage himself to the hilt. So the idea that he was going to care about debt when it's somebody else's money, he could care less.
Ron DeSantis, as we know, his kind of presidential campaign is kind of, hit the skids in many ways. You posted a clip, which I thought was very interesting, of him claiming the Democrats wanting to kind of end Christianity or prevent people from practicing Christianity. What is it with this whole kind of, political rhetoric of just making stuff up about the Democrats? There doesn't seem to be much pushback over it, does there?
I mean, this is typical of every issue, whether it's gas stoves or abortion. It's the hyperbole. It's taking a simple position of the Democrats and stretching it out to absurd degrees. And of course, the Democrats' position is the Lemon decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, which is basically separation of church and state, that there shouldn't be the government shouldn't finance displays of religion, and religious activities should not take place in the public square and on public property and all of that. And it's a very simple position. It's been the law of the land for 100 years. And since the Supreme Court decided that case, it's not all that controversial. But Republicans have an issue with this because they say we are a Christian country. They want prayer in school. They want religion. They want Christianity to be in the public setting, involved in education, all of that stuff. They want tax dollars to go to religious schools, which is a new push now. So this is part of that, which is what he's saying is because Democrats want separation of church and state, that means that they don't want us practicing our religion. No,
meanwhile, there's plenty of Christian Democrats.
Yeah, it's that they don't want you imposing it on us. Okay, it's not that we want to prevent you from doing what you want to do.
And it's that concept of freedom which really kind of underpins the idea of a kind of progressive thinking across the country and the wider world. And yet, that's why it's ironic that we were talking about the Freedom Caucus earlier. Kind of the least free group, the group who are so extreme, are actually anything but celebrating freedom. Here's Ron DeSantis.
Sense of they would say, you practice your faith, but if there's a conflict between leftist agenda and your faith, they want you to have to bend the knee. And if that is able to win the day, we're no longer in an era that our founders envisioned and that Washington articulated of God-given religious freedom. We're back in the pre-America view of religious toleration, where elites decide the contours of how you can practice your faith. And this is our time to get this right as Americans, because if we don't get it right now, we're going to end up losing this battle for all time, and that will squander one of the greatest legacies that we've inherited from our founding fathers in every generation through the years.
I don't know that toleration is a word. Oh, and the other thing, he's lying. He's just lying about all of it.
So here's a politician campaigning during a church service on a Sunday morning, complaining about that Democrats aren't letting them practice their religion. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. I can't think of anything the Democrats have done to the only thing that they argue about is COVID, when some churches weren't allowed to have their services or whatever in certain places. So that's always their reference point of an example when Democrats suppress their ability to practice their faith. And that's always what they go back to is a public health emergency.
Meanwhile, most of those church services went on to Zoom instead and were able to continue without people gathering. So, it's not stopping anybody from practicing their religion at all. But what's so frustrating is that he always uses the founding fathers as kind of leverage. And, the founding fathers were very clear about the separation of church and state. So he's rewriting history. And when he says at the end, if we don't deal with this now, we're going to be stuck with this, he's effectively threatening and saying that, there is a chance to do something about this now, i.e. to bring religion into the forefront. And if we don't do it now, we'll never get the opportunity to do it again.
Yeah, I honestly am very afraid that this Supreme Court will overturn the old separation of church and state decision, and say that that the Establishment Clause does not mean that you can't use taxpayer dollars for religious things. I mean, the test case is already happening. It's in Oklahoma. Oklahoma this year, for the first time, gave money to a Catholic charter school, a private school, tax money, and with the education commissioner saying he knows that it's unconstitutional under current law, but he wants to use what he did to go up to the Supreme Court and hopefully overturn that. And there's a very good chance, given the makeup of the court now, that could happen. So just like we saw a seismic shift on abortion when Roe was overturned, I'm warning people the same thing could happen with our concept of the separation of church and state.
And I think a lot of the issues that we are in the kind of public discourse right now, including many of Trump's crimes, that could end up in the Supreme Court, will be overturned or similar, because the whole point of the Republicans packing the court with not just Republicans or Christians, but extreme views. And we shouldn't underestimate that they haven't really yet had the opportunity to unleash their full extremist power, but they will. And especially the three that Donald Trump put in. And I mean, isn't it shocking and terrifying to know that to get 3 Supreme Court judges during your 4-year tenure is very unusual? But the fact that he chose young, extreme, far-right characters dressed up, some of them give the impression that they're wholesome. Neil Gorsuch, I guess, is an example of that. Brett Kavanaugh, not so much, and Amy Coney Barrett, as we know, is in a Christian cult. So, this is what we're dealing with. I personally believe that the court is treading water at the moment. But once these crimes get sent up, or these cases, get sent up to the Supreme Court on the insistence of Republicans, they're going to just get thrown out. And this is something that is going to be a big problem for the U.S. going forward. Yeah,
I think it's separation of church and state is an issue. Guns is an issue because, past U.S. Supreme Court decisions have always said that reasonable gun restrictions are allowed, and Second Amendment's not absolute. I could see that changing as well.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about this court.
Yeah. You don't create a court in your image and not use it. Do you see what I mean? It's like, it is, for them, it's their fail-safe. And I think that Trump, in the back of his mind, in those interviews, and if he's on the stand, is thinking, well, I need to get this to the Supreme Court.
You mean his cases?
Yeah. Anything.
Yeah, but it's going to take too long. I don't think that anything to deal with his criminal cases would ever reach the Supreme Court in time,
right,
to help him. If that happens, and it very well could happen, some of these things, especially executive privilege stuff, it wouldn't reach the court until 2025, 2026.
Which is also part of his plan, the delay tactic. That's what, he's going to keep pushing for appeal after appeal. And I realized this the other day, is that, I think we talked about this a little bit last week. He will direct his lawyers to do it the Trump way. Not the traditional legal way, not the way that the lawyers would advise based on precedent. It's Trump's way or the highway.
Yeah, I think he's going to defer to his criminal lead counsel more than he has some of the other lawyers in the past. I think he understands that he needs to listen to that person a little bit. But yeah, he'll disregard all guardrails and everything else.
Tell us about Kristi Noem, because it was revealed last week that she'd been having an affair with Corey Lewandowski. She went on TV and denied this. Why would she do that? Just tell us before we show the video.
Yeah, so well, Corey Lewandowski was bounced by Trump. He was running Trump's PAC, Trump Save America. After Trump left the White House, Corey's job was to run Trump's PAC, and that's what he was doing for a long time. But Trump got rid of him, and for Trump to fire one of his close pals is very unusual. Well, the unusual reason why he got rid of him was because he was just known as harassing and intimidating young women around in the Trump orbit. And you know, Trump has a proprietary view of this. It's like, these are my women. You know, you don't mess with my people.
Yeah, I want to harass them. You can't harass
These
them.
are
That's
for
my
me
job
to harass.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So that's why Lewandowski got fired by Trump, is because if Lewandowski had harassed women elsewhere, Trump wouldn't have cared. But he played in Trump's pond. So he gets fired, and then Lewandowski went to go work for Christi Noem's reelection campaign. And that's when the rumors started swirling. This was 2 years ago, about him and Christi Noem had something going. So yes, the interview you're talking about was a year ago at that time when Christi came out and absolutely categorically denied it. Well, now we know that they have been carrying on a long affair for a couple of years now, and it's all come out. So she just looks, and she's another one of these, family values people. She's always putting her husband out and her kids and portray this image that we now know is not true.
It's the hypocrisy, isn't it? And we'll discuss that more when we talk about Lauren Boebert in a couple of minutes. Here's the clip.
Absurd rumor about you allegedly having an affair with a Trump staffer years ago. A couple came out within the past year or two. And it was just out of nowhere, but that was from the right. And it was incredible because you're a sitting governor. You've had a long marriage. You married Brian in right
30
after.
years ago.
Yeah, 30 years ago. And I think you're my age. You're a year younger than I am. I'm 51. You're 50.
Yeah.
So you've been together with the same guy all this time. You have 3 wonderful children, out of the blue. And this is, of course, they do this. I'm sorry to get on my female soapbox, but whenever there's a powerful woman, you can take it to the bank. There's going to be an attack on her, and they say it's either nuts or sluts. You're crazy or you're a slut. And they weren't able to say you were crazy, so they decided to go the other route.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they say the crazy too. They had the entire fight over girls' sports that they came after me on as well.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And now they've just been a constant attack of FOIA requests in our state, creating scandals out of nothing that don't even exist. So listen, this is war, and they've gone after my children. They attacked the first year and a half that I was a governor. They went after my daughter. And then when they couldn't destroy her, they went after my older daughter and caused her to lose her entire business over something that was completely false accusations, but started enough controversy that it affected her business, and she had to completely change careers. So of course they would try to destroy me, then my children, and now they've gone after my husband and myself. And it's difficult. I'd say it's probably hardest on the family when someone's serving in this job, but I think it also makes you stronger. It's something that, we try to get through it, and we honestly don't even read the press that much anymore. I have my staff tell me what I need to know, but stay off the social media comments and a lot of those articles, because just so much of it I don't even recognize as reality.
Well, you're grounded. I mean,
Yeah, she should be grounded.
So I'll address her lie about her daughter there real quick too. So her daughter, what she's talking about there about her daughter is her daughter tried to become a real estate appraiser and took the real estate appraiser's exam 2 or 3 times, failed every time. And she brought in the commissioner in charge of the real estate licensing, and for about 2 hours grilled her and basically was arguing that the test is too hard and she needed to make the test easier, that she felt it wasn't fair for her daughter. So that is what happened with her daughter's situation. And she can deny it all she wants, but her daughter gave up her real estate appraiser license that she ultimately got, and left that business because they got caught. So
a lot of this goes back to what I was saying earlier about, the difference in my eyes between Republicans and Democrats, that forget the kind of politics of it, the policies, is that Democrats have a kind of live and let live attitude, right? You want to do that, fine, you do that, just don't force me to do that.
Yep.
And really Democrats are not the type, and this is a real generalization, but, just to kind of characterize the differences. And Republicans are very much not that. They're like, this is what I do, and this is what you should do, and this is what everyone should do.
Exactly.
And that is a very important difference that I think that, the media should be focusing on more. The hypocrisy, this kind of performative aspect of, I'm a perfect person, I would never break the law. You're lying about other people. You're lying about what Democrats are claiming, stuff that just simply isn't true. And this goes back to Trump claiming that Democrats want to rip a baby from a womb at 9 months. It's just utter garbage. And there's very little pushback on this. And I've always found that really strange, that Democrats could make more of this live and let live attitude and make that part of the branding of the, of the party, going forward. But this is the problem, that Democrats are so nuanced in their thinking, that you won't find two Democrats the same. Republicans have much narrower in terms of those things.
Make one more point on this, because last week's show we talked about Noem being a contender for Trump's running mate.
VP, yeah.
This breaks right after we did that show.
Right.
And I can tell you that Kristi Noem is toast. She will not be Trump's running mate, not because she got caught having an affair, but because she got caught having an affair with Corey Lewandowski, who Trump does not like anymore.
It's so incestuous, isn't it? It's so interesting. So with this one more candidate you think is now going to be the VP pick, who did you say it was?
Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from New York.
That's right. Okay.
I feel really good about that pick even more now. Yeah.
That's because you've only got one pick left.
That's it.
Okay, we have penultimate story is Charlie Kirk. He went on was he sent to North Arizona University by the Republicans to try and, I don't know, kind of get amongst the youth and encourage to convince people to vote Republican? I mean, what's the story behind this? Because he got mobbed, basically.
We could do a whole show on Charlie Kirk's operation. It's actually pretty interesting. So I'll shorten it and just say, there's always these young Republican clubs, and I was involved in them too in college, that always existed. And there are, of course, a minority on college campuses who students tend to be more liberal. So, Charlie Kirk, a dozen years or so, came up with the idea that he was going to form this organization called Turning Point USA. And he never went to college himself. He was bankrolled by a very wealthy older guy who thought that Charlie was going to be the Pied Piper for the Republican Party, that Republican parties have always done poorly with young voters, and Charlie was going to change that. And he was going to start these Turning Point USA chapters, which is basically like a young Republican club thing, all over the United States and college campuses, hold these big meetings. And he was going to be the one that was going to deliver the youth vote for the Republican Party. And the Republican Party has poured millions and millions of dollars into Charlie Kirk for his efforts. And what has happened is it's only gotten worse for them. Like 17% of Gen Z is registered Republican right now. 17%. So it's not working because Charlie is a repulsive person.
Yeah, he is a disgusting
And so
creature,
this was his trip to Northern Arizona when, he was greeted by the students there who just ripped him to shreds. And, the other funny thing about this is that Charlie thinks that this is funny. And he's talking about it today. Look, all these crazy liberal women at Northern Arizona were yelling at me. Well, you know what? You're disparaging them. You're making it even worse. If I was Ronna McDaniel, I would go, how is what he's doing helping us with these voters?
We should say that with Turning Point USA, he has made millions.
Very wealthy.
Right. He is very wealthy off the back of this political
Correct.
movement. So,
and I'll say this too. Many, many Republicans understand that Charlie Kirk is killing them. is hurting them.
Yeah.
But he's become so entrenched with the leadership of the party that they can't get rid of him.
Okay. Here he is being mobbed by an audience that were not particularly warm towards his arrival. Yeah, they didn't like him much. Listen, we have to finish in a couple of minutes, so let's finish with Lauren Boebert. She's been very entertaining for the last week or so, especially last time we talked about her going to the Beetlejuice show. She got thrown out for vaping and for blowing the smoke, and there was a pregnant woman sitting behind her. Now it turns out that there might have been a little fondling going on with her and her date, some inappropriate touching in a public place. And I think she realized that this could be a crime, potentially, and then had to really backtrack to the extent that she's now said that she's never going to see this guy again and all future dates are off.
Yeah, so I have a reliable source who knows the guy, and I absolutely trust this person. And what I was told was that, yes, they dated for months, that he thought she was very, very fun. It was mostly a sexual relationship. There really wasn't as much dating as it was more about sex than dating. That when this went down, he was the one, basically the next day when this broke, who broke it off with her.
Oh, interesting.
So because he did not want to, he couldn't take the heat. He did not want to be a public figure. He did not want to be in the media. And I guess I don't know. I guess he figured he could date Lauren Boebert for a few months and maybe the media wouldn't notice. This is a very naive guy. Like, I'll contrast that with Brian Glenn, who I did, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, who I did talk to about this incident. I talked to him about it. And basically what I said is, you knew the deal. He knew when he started dating Green that a day was going to come when the shit was going to hit the fan. He was prepared for that. But obviously this guy thought he was going to, date Lauren Boebert for a while and nobody would know. I don't know, but he pulled back on it. So now she's kind of telling this story that, he was a Democrat and that's why she ended it, kind of thing. But there was also a fake headline that was done by the Daily Beast that said that was their first date, and that caused a lot of. She never said that. That was just a badly written headline that caused problems.
So that bit about him being a civilian and wanting to have a private life and not be in the limelight.
That's true.
She does say that in this clip. She does mention it, but she kind of swallows that section. So clearly that's the only bit she's telling the truth about. Anyway,
that's the only part that's true. Okay. Correct.
It's always hard whenever there's gravity put on the voters. I'm here to provide levity and lift burdens off of people. So anytime that they're carrying mine, it's something that kind of feel deep inside. But ultimately, all future date nights have been canceled, and I learned to check party affiliations before you go on a date. But all in all, it was mostly a lovely time, and I've taken responsibility for my actions. Would love to know how the musical ended, and I encourage people to go and see it. But it was a great time back in the district, seeing voters and.
So how are the voters taking it? How are the voters taking it right now? Are they understanding at this moment?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks who are certainly understanding, and they understand that it was a part of my personal life, my private time, something that I rarely indulge in, and
And when you say affiliation, as far as knowing not to date the opposite side.
Well, TMZ, I'm pretty sure you told the world I went on a date with a Democrat.
So when it comes like that, when those times when it.
No, he's a wonderful man, and it was a great time to go out and have dinner, enjoy part of a show, and now it's back to work. We're here in DC.
Okay.
And focusing on.
So is that date life? Is that over with him because of some papers say because he had a drag bar or his
Yeah,
bar,
no, nothing to do with anything anybody reported. But
Okay.
honestly, he's a private citizen, and
Respect that.
you know, we have peacefully parted at this time. Great man, great friend, and I wish him all the best.
Okay, so what's
She wishes him all the best. It's time for us to go, which is a shame because I really enjoy these chats, as you full well know. And I like the fact that you and I make a point of not talking to each other for a whole week until this, so that we've got a lot to say to each other. Text messages don't count.
Right.
Ron Filipkowski, thank you. You can follow Ron on Twitter or X. It is at Ron Filipkowski. There's just the one. I'm on Twitter, The Anthony Davis. And you can find me on Threads and elsewhere as well. We'll be back next Wednesday at the same time. You can join the podcast. Just download it. It'll drop this evening if you want to hear the audio version, or you can rewind straight away and watch the show again. Thanks a lot, Ron. Great to see you.
You too, Anthony. See you next week.
Okay, bye for now.